of what our likely future values will be. So whenever you estimate, or if I say future value, it's not an absolute of what, it's just, you're making a projection of what you are likely to get. And even that, when I give the scenario of the office building, right, for instance, you may assume you get 100% tenancy or maybe 80% tenancy. Normally, when you're doing your analysis, you make an assumption for your tenancy rate that you may get maybe 70 or 80% tenancy. It could be you may even get 100% or 90%, which means whatever estimation or assumption you make here, it's lower, and your actual will be higher. It could also be you get what? A lower value. So every time you're doing all this thing, it's just estimations or projection. And that's why there are risk elements inherent in them. Right. So yeah, you raise a good point. In saying the future value, it's not the absolute value. It's a projection or your estimated value of what you're likely to get. Even when it comes to, if you're even doing a residential development, right, you typically have your pricing that you say you will sell your 2-bedroom maybe at £200,000 or £300, and that's what you use for your analysis. But sometimes you have somebody coming in and the person is able to negotiate for a discount, which means it drops what? Your total revenue. So all these are projections. So most times when you are doing in this analysis, you need to sometimes look at your best scenario and the worst scenario.
Exactly.
Do some sort of risk analysis in here, sensitivity analysis to come up with the actual. Right. So.
Exactly.
Sir,
Yeah.
can I just go one slide back, please?
Yeah.
On the weighted cost of capital equations, where you put down cost of equity and cost of debt. Is that in percentage?
Is that, yeah, so yeah, that's a percentage.
Thank you.
That's a percentage. Because that's what you use to calculate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just...
Can I ask, for the future bill or the present bill, where do we get the interest rate?
Where do you get the interest rate? Yeah, that's where we got the interest rate. So we kind of, we said the interest rate should be what? The weighted cost of what capital. So you are borrowing from the bank, right? When it comes to the interest rate, you are borrowing from the bank or debt, which is the RD. You just don't want to, because you are borrowing from different sources, you just don't want to use the rate from the bank. You want to use the average cost of borrowing from different entities or elements. And that's how you come up with the interest rate. So if let's assume you borrow 15% you borrow 15% from an equity partner, right, who is charging you 10% to give you that money. And maybe you borrow from the bank 75%, and the bank is charging you maybe 7% for giving you the money, right? What interest rate are you to use when it comes to calculating the present value? So to be able to get, you want to be able to get a weighted average of the different places you are borrowing from. You get it? So if you're borrowing from, let's say, a bank or 3 different banks and they are all at different rates, you want to be able to get an average cost of your interest rate, right? So if 2 banks, maybe bank A gives you 50%, and let's say interest rate of maybe 8%, and bank B also gives you 50%, and interest rate of let's say 10%. The average of 10 and 8 will be what? 9%. Right, and that's what you use.
At the same time, is it affecting the inflation rate as well, the cost of capital?
Yes, so normally when the banks are giving you their interest, they factor in inflation usually. That's why they sort of have, let's discuss with you whether you want a fixed rate or a variable rate. So with a fixed rate, if they're giving it to you at a fixed rate, right, then they factor in inflation for the period that they're likely to give you the money over. But if they do not factor inflation, where they go by, let's say, variable interest rate, in that case, anytime inflation will have an effect on the yearly interest rate. So depending on what the yearly interest rate is, they add it.
You mean like it's included to the bank interest rate?
Yeah. Yeah. You get it. So if we know our interest rate, right, when it comes to a project, we know these are the core elements. To be able to estimate, to be able to define, we know these are the core elements of the project, we need to define our scope, which comes in from the work breakdown structure. We need to have our program, which comes in from the precedence diagram of the Gantt chart. We need to have done our design, have our contract and cash flow stuff in there, right? We also need to know where we're borrowing from, which is the cost of capital, right? And then also the other key thing now we need to do is to be able to estimate the value of the property itself, right? We want to be able to know how much the property will cost us at the very beginning. Because without knowing the cost of your property, it's a bit difficult for you to be able to know whether the project is likely to be profitable or not. If you know your income, your income should be matched against the cost of the property. To be able to estimate the cost of our property, we need to do what? Cost planning, right? Cost planning helps us to be able to estimate the cost of our property. Once we know the cost of our property, we can determine its profitability or otherwise. And for some of you who are QSs or come from QS background, you do have a fair idea of how that is done when it comes to cost planning. So the key thing, if you go by the RIBA plan of work, right, where we have the various stages, right? These are the various stages you need to go through. And then typically, what happens with the cost is that when it comes to actual cost expenditure for construction, the reason why this is important is that usually your cost is always negative, right from the very beginning of a project, right? You're spending money. So at RIBA plan, from stage 0 to the concept design all the way to construction, you're most likely spending money until you get to construction where you start with receiving income. So what happens is you pay gradually to the designers, to the contractors, and your biggest cost, or let's say your cumulative cost, increases right up towards construction, up to completion and handover. And then once you get in here, you start generating income, right? So if you start generating income, either through sales or through rent. And usually you don't make, you're not able to break even right at completion. Normally it takes you a number of years to be able to break even. Because even when you start receiving your income, if you have an office building, right, you may have spent maybe £10 million on developing the office building. But in your very first year of renting, you may get £1 million. It does not cover for the cost of construction. It may take you 10 years or 15 years to be able to start breaking even or making profit in real terms. So it's quite important here because sometimes if you do not consider your cash flow, what's called cash flow diagram, in terms of your income and expenditure, you may assume a profit is profitable. You may assume, okay, I build my property for 10 million. I think when I'm done, my total rent may be 20 million or 30 million. You've not really considered the time value of money. What you ignored here is that there's an interest component. And for whatever money that goes out, they'll be charging interest on it as well. So let's say, if you spend 10 million for construction, and the interest on the loan, it's maybe 10%, for instance, per annum, right? It means every year you're likely at the project completion for the first year, the interest being charged there is 1 million. 10% of 10 million is 1 million, which means the interest alone is 1 million. So you need to be able to know that your cost of construction is not just, the money you pay out is not just the cost of construction. Over time, it also what includes interest. And by having a cash flow diagram usually, and the discounted cash flow approach, you're able to assess your income and expenditure. This has to do with contractor financing. So what you realize when it comes to project financing from a contractor's perspective, right? If you're a contractor, I know quite a number of you will go into the contractor organization. And if you work for the contractor organization, what happens is you always tend to work in deficit or negative for a client, right? When you start off on a project, let's say this is year one, right? You realize that maybe you may have incurred, this is the cost that a contractor incurred, the contractor's expense. And these are the payments that are due to the contractor. Normally, the contractor may work for maybe a month or two, or let's even say hypothetically 6 months. The contractor works for about 6 months, and in this case, let's assume the contractor is paid 6 months after. But normally, the contractor works for a month, he submits valuation, the next month it's processed, and usually it takes about 2 months for the contractor to be paid, right? So normally, if you work, let's say if you do a value of work of, let's say, £500,000 here, by the time the client pays you that £500,000, you may have done additional work, right? Let's assume you submit your valuation in month one, and then maybe the contract says that let's assume, the contractor submits evaluation in month one, and the contract says that the consultant uses 1 month to assess the valuation submitted by the contractor, and then the client pays 1 month later. It means, let's assume the contractor submits, we are in October, right? The contractor has worked to the tune of, let's say, £2 million, right? It means the consultant is most likely to finish the assessment in November. And then the client, 1 month later from November, will be December. So by the time the client pays this $2 million, which was submitted, which was work done in October, we are already in December. And by the time we get to December, the contractor will definitely have been working on the site, right? The contractor is between October and that December. The contractor could have done maybe an additional work of maybe £500,000 or £400,000. So the contractor is usually always behind. This is what you have here. So at every point in time, the value of work done by the contractor is normally more than what he would have received, what a contractor would have received from the client at any point in time. So normally, if you are working for a contractor, you need to consider this aspect as well, that at every point in time, you'll always be behind. And that means you need to arrange your own source of funding or financing. It could be an overdraft facility from the bank or some form of loan from the bank as well. Right. But in some cases, because what happens sometimes is, if it's usually a big project, the client sometimes does have a lot of clout or some leverage. So the client sometimes can say, okay, if the contractor especially is facing challenges, right, the client can go to maybe a bank and say, okay, this contractor is working on my project, XYZ. You help the contractor secure a loan at a much lower interest rate because maybe as an organization, you are big enough to be able to, your balance book is able to provide adequate guarantee for that contractor. Whereas if the contractor just went, maybe the contractor's assets are very small or minimal. So as a client, you could go and sort of arrange that form of guarantee for the client or for the contractor and help the contractor secure a lower load.
Can I ask a practical question, sort of with regards to this, when you're talking about financing? There are two things I think that, A, when you're talking about staggered payments or stage payments, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there is going to be a gap of value addition for every stage.
Yeah.
From the client. Now, let's talk about some heavy contracts, millions of pounds that can actually send a contractor bankrupt if the payment doesn't hit on time. Do you take out an insurance in the industry? And is that included in the cost of the project when you bid it?
Insurance from whose perspective?
From the contractor's perspective, if the payments are delayed, let's say the client goes bankrupt, we were doing a case study, BBC Broadcasting, where they had to change the architects and everything like that. So how would that affect the whole dynamics?
Okay, so someone is asking a question about on large projects, right?
Yes.
Whether contractors do take insurance against payment delays, assuming
And how much is that?
This must be stated in the contract.
so.
Oh,
For those, what do you think? For those who have been on projects, what do you think? Any idea?
It is agreed previously in the contract within the terms. In case of any delays, who's going to pay for these delays? And it is declined.
Okay, someone says that it's agreed in the contract that normally when it comes to such projects, if there are any delays, there's an agreement of who is to pay when there are delays.
But it is
That's-
the case of, like he said, client gets bankrupt, so it might happen during the project, then what he will do?
Yes, I'm trying to understand that. If you share your expenses, so I don't
Someone
know
is
what
asking
I
whether
don't understand.
what happens when the client gets bankrupt.
Bankrupt, let's say during the stage and everything else, you've got products sitting up there, the contractor, how does it recover? That's the sort of thing I'm trying to.
Well, basically we'll go to the court, then they
Yeah,
will
but
judge.
even
they
court
will
cannot
judge there. I didn't experience that before, to be honest. But yeah, most probably will go to the court
Yeah.
then.
Salim, you've got any experience of anything like that?
Okay, so normally what they're trying to do now is to have what's called a project bank account now, right? Where
The escrow accounts you're talking about then?
kind of the project bank account,
Okay.
where at the very early beginning, the client needs to show that the client has adequate money for some of this project from the project bank account perspective. But then, usually, insurance for large scale project, one, the contract normally has clauses or specification in terms of, when contractors has to pay, if there are delays, the sort of interest clauses that applies.
Okay.
Right. And then obviously, almost for very large scale project, insurances are also taken.
Coming back to what you said, okay, the insurance is there, and you were talking about bank guarantees. The client can actually avail bank guarantees to qualify the contractor.
Sorry?
You can take out a bank guarantee, like when you have an exports and imports letter of credit, LOC, that sort of thing. So you actually have a bank guarantee within the construction sector. I wasn't aware of, that's what I'm trying to work out.
They're trying to come up with this project bank account, where right from the very beginning, right? So you have this legislation, the project bank account. So they're trying to make sure that, they're trying to make use of project bank accounts where the client on one hand shows money and then
Okay.
also suppliers are paid.
I think it says it's a ring fence account, so once they put the money in there, they cannot take it out. And
Yeah.
you've got a dedicated sum already sitting on there. And who gets the interest on the money as well?
Well, that I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I haven't. I'll be giving a wrong answer if I go in
Something
there.
I fancy going into, so I want to, I should learn about it.
Sure. Yeah. But you can read further about it. Right.
I've been looking at pics as well, just for this one.
Yeah. As to who gets the interest, I'm not too sure.
I think we could be due for a break, no?
Sure. We'll go soon.
Just 2 minutes.
Maybe let's take a 5-minute break. Let's take a 5-minute break.
It stopped. Can I cross?
Good, right? Yeah.